But Israel is not going to win in Lebanon, and ultimately it's going to fail. The question is, how long will it take? Just like the U.S. war against Iran and the siege warfare, the United States wants to strangle Iran and it wants to outweight Iran. Yes, it can continue trying to do that, but at the end of the day, the United States is going to fail, and it's only going to create greater harm to the global economy and the U.S. economy. And the U.S. has much more to lose than Iran does. So Iran will definitely outweigh the United States, no matter how difficult things are in the months ahead. And Hezbollah will outweigh the Israeli regime, no matter how difficult things get in the weeks and months ahead. And I think that Netanyahu is in very serious trouble. And as I said earlier, uh, I think the Axios has zero credibility, but the Axios report on the phone conversation between Trump and Netanyahu, I think there's more in there that meets the eye. I think um, this was direct. This was intended to perhaps intended to weaken Netanyahu in the upcoming election.
I think the new report on NBC News, it says the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency has raised the threat level of Israeli spying on American officials to the highest level. Uh, the-
What was it before? Like 99.999% is now 99.9999%. Like, what has changed? I mean, I think um, John Kiriakou somewhere said that they already have like, I think he said something like this. They already have 99% of all the information in the United States. There really isn't much that they don't know. They apparently listen
he
in
said that.
on
He
the
said that.
president's phone conversations.
Yeah. But the reason I mentioned this is that the war is not going well, so the blame game is starting. Who's to blame for this disaster that has happened? Is it going to be Benjamin Netanyahu? Is it going to be someone in the Trump administration, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio? I don't know who's going to be to blame, because this is when you're winning, you everyone is just, they're all coming together. But this is right, and what's going on, as you mentioned with the case of Benjamin Netanyahu, I think he's in the process of learning that he's going to be responsible for what has happened in the Middle East. And Donald Trump is not going to accept the responsibility of this disastrous war of choice against Iran.
Again, I'm speculating, but Hegseth isn't important, nor is Rubio. These are just, pawns that can be thrown in the bin or the trash can. But I think that if, I mean, the Israeli regime is despised. What Axios has attributed to Trump is a fact that everyone hates Israel, the Israeli regime, and everyone hates the Netanyahu. So if I was a Zionist, God forbid, if I was a monstrous human being like a Zionist, I would want to remove Netanyahu, and I would want to put someone in his place who's just as sinister and evil, because the opposition to Netanyahu is just like Netanyahu. They're genocidal. They too want Dahia and Beirut to be flattened. They too want genocide in Gaza. I mean, they're the same thing. But if I was a Zionist in the United States, I would be very worried about the future. Very worried, because the world hates me and the world hates my ethno supremacism. And so what I would do is I would try to put the blame on someone like on Netanyahu, and I would try to get rid of Netanyahu, and I would try to replace him with someone just as sinister and evil, but pretend that it wasn't him, and that the Western media can then collectively say that this is a new beginning, and the excesses or whatever, because they can't say genocide, the excesses of Netanyahu and the crimes committed by, or the controversial Netanyahu, his exit from power is a good thing, and it shows that the Israeli people are reasonable people who don't want genocide. They're not all lies, of course. But this is what I would do. I would try to get him removed. I would have him try to make sure he loses the next election, and that a coalition is formed without Netanyahu. It could include his current allies with his opponents or elements of his from within his allies and elements from within his opponents or just his opponents, depending on the results. And then I would try to give the Israeli regime a facelift and perhaps back down on some of these fronts, uh, like in Gaza or Lebanon, and probably preserve what I've gained in Syria or something like that. So again, this is just sheer speculation. But if I was, God forbid, a Zionist, that's what I would do. And I think that this whole, NBC report or the Axios piece, all of this sort of fits into this. Something is wrong with the Israeli regime, and of course, it's not Zionism. But I think it all helps to weaken Netanyahu.
You've mentioned, Professor Marandi, that Iran is using the older missiles. Still, they're using in the recent attack on Kuwait and Bahrain, because there's the footage is coming out of Iran. It shows that Iran has used a mod missile, which is MRBM, middle range ballistic missile, instead of using SRBM, short range ballistic missile. Is that part of that plan to use the older missiles, less accurate missiles, in this sort of response to the United States that are not that much important? It's some sort of response to the United States. Is not They're not going to be. And what is it? Because people are asking, why do they need to use middle range ballistic missiles? Why not? Because Kuwait is so close to Iran. Why is that?
Well, for a number of reasons. One is that they want to rid themselves of older missiles. Second is that they're testing the air defenses, and they're testing their own missiles to see how they would perform against air defenses. So all of these are factors that that they use. So for them, it's important to see what capabilities these regimes have, because if the war is restarted, Iran is going to start pounding these regimes. So they'll use different missiles. They'll fire from different parts of the country. They'll try to preserve newer missiles and use up their older missiles. They can't keep those missiles forever. And if, in a few years, they'll just be useless. So during the war, they prioritized these older missiles, and they used them during the first few weeks. During the first couple of weeks, they were basically using the older missiles. So yeah, it's part of their strategy. The Iranian missile numbers are so huge now, and they're so large in number that they can they in some places they just don't have enough space for the older missiles and drones. The same is true with drones. The Iranians now have a lot more drones than they had at the beginning.
There is something we talked
And
with
by the
Marandi.
way, they're building new underground bases
Mm,
as we speak.
You know, before coming to this live, we were talking about it because there are people we have to talk about it, because there are people right now talking about Iranian. Some reports showing that Iranian President Pezeshkian told his counterpart in Pakistan that Iran gonna get out of NPT. Iran gonna, if the escalations happens, Iran gonna, you know, they're gonna do some sort of experiment of the nuclear bomb and nuclear explosion in Iran somewhere in the desert, and to show the United States that Iran has the capabilities of the using nuclear weapons if they attacked by nuclear weapons from Israel. And what is your understanding of that, and how do you see the whole case of Iran pursuing nuclear bombs or pursuing nuclear weapons?
Um, you know, Nima, there are some things I know a lot about, and there's some things I know a little bit about, and there's some things I know very little about. So, for example, when it comes to some in Iranian politics and Iranian foreign policy, I know some things. I don't claim to be an expert. And when it comes to like military matters, like drones and missiles, I have connections. I know a thing or two about Iran's missile capabilities, its drone capabilities, the general things, not details. I don't want to know details. I don't want to know anything secret. But when it comes to the nuclear issue, I don't know anything that's secret. So I cannot go out and categorically make any statement about Iran's nuclear program based on uh, some knowledge that I have, which is non-existent. What I can say is that if Iran wanted to develop a nuclear weapon, it would have developed it years ago. This is not me saying it. This is Dr. Kharazi saying it. He was martyred, of course, during the war. He was 8 years. For 8 years, he was the foreign minister of Mr. Khatami, and then he became the leader's foreign policy advisor, one of two foreign policy advisors, him and Dr. Velati, and he runs an important think tank, ran an important think tank before he was martyred. He said that Iran could. Uh, he said this in public a couple of times, at least, that Iran could have built a nuclear weapon a long, long time ago. And he said this a few years ago, like 2, 3 years ago. So, yes, Iran could easily develop a nuclear weapon through its own indigenous capabilities. It's not easy. It's not difficult for Iran. It's not a problem. And now Iran is more technologically advanced than it was years ago. So, that's not a problem for you. And of course, Iran's missile program is we see how effective it was. Uh, they defeated the United States and the Israeli regime in 2 wars. So that's not a big issue. The issue, and of course, the issue is what Dr. Larijani, who was also martyred in this war, and a person who I personally knew and I liked a lot, a very, very good man. So the same was true with Dr. Kharazi, but people always spoke highly of him. But Dr. Larijani, I knew personally more than I knew Dr. Kharazi. Dr. Larijani, before he became the chair of the Supreme National Security Council, he said on television once that, if I'm not mistaken, this was a couple of years back, he said that Iran has no intention of developing a nuclear weapon. But if I think he said something like, and I think maybe Dr. Kharozi said something like this too. I'm growing old and I forget, so people will have to look this up. But he said something like, if Iran's is faces an existential threat, then Iran would reconsider its nuclear posture. I don't see Iran facing an existential threat at the moment, right? So that's A. I cannot comment on what the Pakistani official said to our friends because I know that Larry and Pepe are two very honest people, very serious analysts, and they would report what they say with great accuracy. And I'm sure the person they spoke with is a person who must have some credibility or some status in Pakistan that which makes them take him seriously. But I don't know that person, and I don't know what the motives are for him to say this. What I all I can say, and so I can't say it's wrong because I, I don't have evidence. And but what I can so what I can say is this: first, an introduction. Iran Ayatollah Khamenei gave a fatwa against nuclear weapons, and this has a history. His predecessor, Imam Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, gave a fatwa against chemical weapons at a time when the West gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to use against Iranians and killed many, many people and maimed many, many people. And of course, these Arab regimes that are complicit now, back then they funded Saddam's war machine. They helped with the chemical weapons program and other such programs and the delivery means of delivery for those chemical weapons. So back then, and the West was trying to prevent Iran from even purchasing gas masks. So back then, they went and told Imam Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, that we need to develop new chemical weapons. And he said no. He said, deal with what, you know, deal with this, deal with this monstrous enemy. And the, oh, I'm saying this, in any way you can, but you can't have weapons of mass destruction. You can't have chemical weapons. They're inhumane. So Ayatollah Khamenei, his successor, the next leader, he gave a fatwa against nuclear weapons many years ago. And that stands. Now, in Shia, in Shia ideology, there are some differences with Sunni jurisprudence. In Shia jurisprudence or ijtihad, the gates are open. In Sunni Islam, the gates to ijtihad are closed. They've been closed for well over 1,000 years. But for Shia, the gates to ijtihad are open. And so that means that time and place are key components in the decisions made by the mujtahid, the jurisprudent, the scholar of Islamic law. So, for example, based upon his knowledge and, just like a senior scholar in any field, his knowledge of Islam and jurisprudence, he has to take the factor of time and place into consideration. So his ruling about whatever religious law in Brazil may be different from in India, and it may be different from in Iran, and it may be different from South Africa, right? So place has an important role to play, context, because the society they're in, circumstances. Time is also a factor. What was appropriate for the 19th century is different from the 20th century, is different from the 21st century. Again, it is founded in that knowledge of Islam and jurisprudence, but these factors have a role to play. That's what makes the gates to ijtihad being open makes the rulings dynamic, while preserving those essences, those core essences of Islamic values. So the ruler now, the person, the wali faqih, the leader now is another person. It is a third leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei. He is also a jurisprudent. He is also a mujtahid. He can give his own ruling based on time, place, and his knowledge of Islam and the circumstances that he sees that surround his the nation or the around the issue that's under discussion. He can produce a different fatwa. It could be different from Ayatollah Khamenei's fatwa. Ayatollah Khamenei's fatwa stands, but he can have a different fatwa, and he is the leader now. But I don't see any indication of that. I don't see any indication in the public sphere that the state, that the government wants to shift policy. Because until now, all that I've seen over the years is the government trying to tell the people that a nuclear weapon is not a good thing and why we do not want a nuclear weapon. Even though some MPs, members of parliament, some people would go out, or clerics, or I don't know, other public figures would say we need nuclear weapons, but the state, high-ranking officials, military officials, all of them would go out of their way in the public to say that we do not need nuclear weapons. So before the 12-day war, as I recall, it was roughly 50-50 usually in polling in Iran. Like half the people wanted nuclear weapons, half didn't. And that was, of course, the state or the government and people were saying we don't need them. After the 12-day war, the government position didn't change, but the polls that I saw after the war clearly showed the majority of Iranians wanted a nuclear. I would imagine, and I have not seen polls since this war began, and I know polls have been taken. I don't know if this question was among them, but I haven't seen any poll results. I would imagine that even a larger majority of Iranians believe we need nuclear weapons. And my anecdotal experience says that because when I'm on the streets and like I'm shopping or walking or doing something and people approach me, they oh you know if, usually they say we need a nuclear weapon. But the state has not moved in that direction at all. I have not seen any indication whatsoever that the government, the state, the armed forces, and of course the Supreme National Security Council and the leader have shifted their position. And I don't see a reason at the moment why they should, because I don't see Iran being under some sort of existential threat, especially after the results of this war. So and I don't see why Iran would need to even explode a nuclear weapon. I mean, what would be the need? With the technology that exists today, the simulations work very effectively. I don't think there's a need for anyone to even waste a nuclear weapon if they really need one on such an experiment.